Welcome to the 2020 Harbor Lawn Memorial Day ceremony. Things are a little different this year than previous years because of the coronavirus. But we still wanted you to have the presentation of Memorial Day, and it will come to you by cassette so that you'll be able to enjoy the presentation even though you cannot come to the cemetery itself on Memorial Day. From the beginning of time, nations have honored their war dead, particularly those nations who were victorious. Some nations were free, others were subjugated people controlled by dictators or those who had absolute control over the lives of those they presumably served. But in America, it started with the American Revolution. And in 1755, a young man was born, one of 12 children, whose mind was agile, who was good at sports, and bright in academic achievement. He graduated from Yale College in 1775 at age 20 and was immediately commissioned an officer in the Revolutionary Army. Within a short time, he was made a captain. And one of the achievements that he had, I must say, it's the most notable achievement, he secured the plans to a British fort along the Hudson. And the British captured him. And he was tried for treason because the British Empire considered the American colonies part of their empire. The fort that the plans came from is now West Point. The trial was held. He was convicted, and at the site of his execution, the British officer in charge said, "Do you have any last words you wish to say?" He said, "I regret that I have only one life to give to my country. I want you to take this to heart. I have only one life to give to my country." That inspirational passion of patriotism has fueled many Americans who have been to war. A little later, a German general, an experienced officer in forming armies, came to the United States, or I should say came to the Continental Army to help them change a mob into an army. And he was impressed by the tenacity of American soldiers. He said they were not paid on time, they were ill-fed, ill-clothed, ill-housed, but they did not give up. Why was that? They were fighting for freedom. At Valley Forge, the low point of the American Revolution, there were soldiers whose shoes were worn out. They were ill-clothed. but they put up with all this deprivation because they were fighting for freedom. Now when we come to later wars, we come to the Civil War, for example. The passion to be independent and to control our own destiny was evident in both the North and in the South. The result of that war was stunning in its losses. The North and the South together lost over 600,000 men. And considering the modest population of the continent at that time, that was a remarkable amount. Consider American losses in World War II, a little over 400,000. But in the case of the Civil War, we counted the losses on both sides because they were all Americans. Now during this time, because of the heavy losses, one of the most generous and loving tributes that was made came from the Southern women who decorated the graves of Union soldiers as well as Confederate soldiers. And that did a lot to ease the hard feelings that had been engendered on both sides. The need for freedom is so great. People came to this country to begin with because they wanted freedom. And they were willing to endure all kinds of hardships and deprivations in order to build a life in which they could be free. In World War II, I should say 75 years after World War II, I was invited, along with a number of other combat veterans of World War II, to come to Belgium for the 75th anniversary of the Battle of the Bulge. I was honored to be asked to go. The funds for that trip were provided by a charitable organization. My son and I attended, and on the very first day, after 2 long nights of night flights, we went to the Luxembourg Cemetery, where the largest American cemetery in Europe. We saw the grave of General Patton and the graves of many other noble soldiers who gave their life during that battle. I was asked by the mayor of Saint-Hubert, whose city was captured and held by the Germans until we changed that. That little city has a museum dedicated to the 87th Infantry Division, the one that I was part of in World War II. The mayor asked me to say a few words. He said, "Why did you come all this distance from California all the way to Saint-Hubert for this event?" I said, "I came because I wanted to reaffirm the victory of good over evil. You cannot have a civil society unless you can worship, work, and recreate in an atmosphere of freedom." I said 25 years before we came to Europe on Victory Europe Day, May 8th, 1995. I was interviewed by NBC News and made a statement in front of the Rem Cathedral, and ended up in Berlin, where the crowd said, "What is America's policy?" I said, "The United States is the strongest nation in the world." But the history of strongest nations is that they are supplanted or replaced by a stronger nation. So our plan B is to always represent and assist democratic institutions throughout the world. Because when we do that, when we protect their freedom, we are also protecting our own freedom. The idea of honoring our dead has been present from the very beginning. And for 100 years, that time of honoring our war dead was called Decoration Day. It was called Decoration Day in large measure because of General Logan, who was head of the Grand Army of the Republic, the organization of Civil War Union veterans. And he asked that the day be the end of May, because all of the spring flowers were now in full bloom, and allowed family members and friends to bring these flowers to the cemetery and decorate the graves of those who had given their lives for the freedom of everyone else. That continued for 100 years. And only in the 20th century did it become Memorial Day. But Memorial Day is still honored with the recognition that we would not be free today if previous generations had not put their lives on the line so that we could be free. There is nothing more precious than to be a free people, to be able to carry out the goals of your life, the purpose of your life, and not be interfered with. It is the purpose of a free people to have a government that serves the people, not one that controls the people. These ceremonies that go on across all of the United States bring us to a point of humility, a point of gratitude, a point of repledging our lives to be more useful, more helpful, so that we fulfill the purpose that God has given to us for our life. And the first day of combat for myself, I saw a situation which, because of its explosiveness, was unforgettable. I was looking across the meadow of the men standing there, and I noticed a group, about 10 to 12 men who had gathered together. They were bored. They expected to be brought into action at the beginning of the day, but here it was 11 o'clock in the morning and they still had not been called. And they huddled together in conversation. Now, I don't know whether a German forward artillery observer saw this or whether it was a lucky shot. But suddenly, I heard a whir. I knew it was a heavy piece of artillery. I hit the ground. It was a powerful explosion. And where those 8 to 10 men were was nothing but a large hole. At the left of those men was a beautiful tree. It was a deciduous tree. And being December, it had dropped its leaves, but it was a beautiful tree because the branches were balanced and it was very attractive even without any leaves. But after the explosion, I looked at that tree and I thought, that's the ugliest tree I have ever seen. Why was that? It was because it was festooned with the flesh and fabric of those 8 to 10 men. The thing that is so difficult to understand is how life can be snuffed out so quickly, so completely, eternally. Now, we have heard in our Christian education the fact that each child is a gift from God. Each child has special qualities that no other child has unique characteristics that no other child has. And that child is dependent upon parents and teachers to bring that child to the position of contributing to society with the skills that God has given him. Because of that, we have believed that every child is unique and special. But only in the last couple of years have we found out that that Christian teaching was absolutely true. An officer from the tomb of the unknown soldier in Washington called a family in Arkansas and said, "We have identified your son." And they said, "Would you please send him back to Missouri so he can be with his family?" And they did. So the tomb of the unknown soldier, while it still has an unknown soldier from World War I, and an unknown soldier from World War II, and an unknown soldier from the Korean War, it no longer has an unknown soldier from the Vietnam War, because DNA has discovered the uniqueness, the absolutely complete uniqueness of every person. That is wonderful news for each life, for each person, and highlights the importance of parents and teachers in helping a young life to reach its full potential. That is the blessing of that recent discovery. We are at a point where we begin to recognize the uniqueness of the United States. We are now in our 3rd century of freedom, where we can worship as we choose, work where we want to work, and recreate where we choose to recreate. This allows our spirit and our whole person to develop more completely. For all these things are really a gift from God. It took us a long time to find out. I thank you for listening to this program today, and we look forward to being with you next Memorial Day. It's been an honor to be with you today, and we thank you for listening. I don't know how long that was.